with JMU Hall of Famer and someone who knows a hell of a lot about taking it to the house.
Joyce breaks a tackle and goes in for a touchdown. Another spectacular run by Delvin Joyce.
Delvin Joyce brings his unique perspective to the podcast to break down all things he's seeing about JMU football, with a little help from EPA King Jack Fitzpatrick and Bennett Conlin.
Here he goes. He's going to try to beat the punter. He does. He's gone. And that is a touchdown.
Welcome into To the House.
Look at him turn back and forth. Oh, he broke his ankles. Now he's got an entourage. And he's got a touchdown.
Now, here's Delvin Joyce with Jack Fitzpatrick and Bennett Conlin.
What's going on, JMU Nation? Yo, that intro still gets me fired up. I know this is the third time we've done this, but man, I get so fired up. I want to return a kick or something. So welcome to the house. I am your host, Delvin Joyce. Some people, again, call me the People's Choice. I am joined this time not by Jack Fitzpatrick, a.k.a. Jay Feezy. I got my guy, Bennett Conlin. And Bennett, you know, this is your first appearance on To the House. So you actually get a nickname on your first appearance. I'm going to say you are Bennett. He's all in it. What's going on, Bennett?
I like that. I appreciate the nickname. I'm excited to be here. We've got an exciting game, at least for me, right? The eternal pessimist. This is sort of a perfect time for me to debut on the podcast.
I love the pessimism. I also love the Detroit Lions gear. I love that. I did not know, we were talking about this in pre-production, right?
Yeah.
That you are a Lions fan. How did that happen?
Family from Ann Arbor area, sort of grew up, lived there a little bit there growing up. And I got in on the Lions and they very quickly went to 0-16. So I stuck with them, even though there were some lulls there over the years, and Dan Campbell has the boys in a good spot.
Dan Campbell has the boys in a good spot. And by the way, I played with Dan Campbell. He was our other tight end when I was with the Giants. So it was Jeremy Shockey on one side, Dan Campbell on the other. And when I tell you he was a great teammate, Dan was one of the best. So I'm also a Lions fan this season.
I'm glad to hear that. I did not know about the Dan Campbell connection, but that changes everything.
Dan's the man.
BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. From the preseason NFL to college kicking off, BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our winner-take-all $300,000 NFL Survivor Pool for the upcoming season. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's promo code BLEAV, to get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here.
All right, you know, we have to talk about this game, and you already said it. You know, the title of this episode is "A Win is a Win?" ? And as I think about this game, Bennett, you are going to have to let me cook a little bit, because I am probably going to get on my soapbox just a tad, and I want to say to JMU Nation, we got to calm down, right? I think the Brits said, keep calm and carry on. If I had a t-shirt right now, it would say CTFD. We have to calm down. And, you know, I think this will be a theme going forward in college football. I think if you look at the college football landscape, the first 3 weeks of the season, it's all about survival. And I also think about it a lot like golf. I mean, Bennett, you play golf, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, we've talked about golf. Bennett, have you ever gone from the parking lot to the first tee with no warm up?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And when I do that, my goal in those first 3 holes, you know what it is? It's just to not put a big score on the scorecard, right? I have to try to make bogey. I can maybe get lucky and squeeze in a par, but I can't take a 7 or an 8. Until I get warmed up, and maybe on hole 4 or hole 5, I start cooking and I start feeling good and I find my rhythm. And for me, that's what this college football season is going to be like. I want you to think about the fact that we have over 60 new players. We've got a new coaching staff. which also means that we have a whole new offense, whole new defensive scheme, and a whole new special team scheme. And so I do believe that's going to improve in successive years as we get some stability at the coaching position, of course. But I just think this first 3-4 games, we've got to be patient and wait for the thing to come together. Now, Bennett, I told you I was going to get on my soapbox, so let me cook. I know you want to get in here, but
go. I want to hear you. Go.
So the other thing from this week's game, I was actually in Harrisonburg for the Hall of Fame induction. I got to see the 2004 football team get inducted, as well as Mickey Matthews. But I could not stay for the game. So I had to come back and watch it on television, just like a lot of people in JMU Nation. And the one thing that I was so disappointed as the team ran into the tunnel, by the way, listen, the game was not what we wanted. But as the team ran into the locker room at the end of the first half, the Boo Birds, I could not believe it. I was beside myself. I've never been embarrassed for this program like I was watching our fans boo our team on that day. Now, let me tell you guys, for the people who were booing, because I do believe it was a minority of the fans in the stands, but for the people who were booing, let me tell you who you were booing. First off, you were booing some of the players who decided to return to this program after the program experienced such amazing turmoil and upheaval after Signetti left. And some of them probably could have gone to Indiana with Sig. Some of them also probably could have entered the transfer portal and gone to other programs, but they decided to come back to JMU Nation. And these are some of the same people that gave you two of the most memorable seasons in JMU football history. And that's who we were booing. We were also booing some of the players who came to our program from the transfer portal, and maybe some of the high school kids who had all sorts of options around the country, but they came to JMU. And one of the things that a lot of these players said, Bennett, is they said, you know what, man, I heard so much about JMU Nation and the fans and how great they are and the support and the love from the community. Those are the players that got booed. And now if you think about big picture, I want you to think about big picture for a second. We had a ton of recruits there on Saturday. A ton of recruits. High school, 4 or 5-star athletes, 3-star athletes, whatever you want to say. And they're trying to decide where they want to spend the next 4 or 5 years of their college football careers. And the takeaway that those kids walked away with, the performance was bad enough, but the bigger takeaway is that this community, this fan base, may not necessarily support me through the ups and downs. That's who we were booing. The coaches are fair game. I got booed as a member of the New York Football Giants by our home fans at the Meadowlands several times. But guess what? I got a direct deposit check in the mail every Friday, right? The direct deposit hit, and it really was not that significant. So, Bennett, I want to open it up to you real quick. I'm going to hop off my soapbox for a second. I want you to hop on. What did you think about the Boo Birds?
Yeah, so I thought a little bit, I guess, of both ways. There were some fans who said they were booing Chesney's clock management in the first half and sort of the way that they were okay going in 3-0. So from that, I think maybe a little more fair game. I do think, though, that JMU fans are guilty of getting really high expectations and sort of almost ignoring some of the very valid concerns and challenges facing the team, like the new players. And the new players they brought in, a lot of them are very good. But like you were saying, right, with the golf analogy where you're warming up and getting into it, I do think like it's the first half of the first home game. They won the game. And when you boo, I think it gets taken personally by a lot of the players. It does seem like one where maybe take a deep breath. I think there's a pretty good chance a few weeks from now, we don't see these kind of performances from JMU and they work some things out over the bye week, over the subsequent games. I think there's still a lot to like about this team, and it's easy to get bogged down like in the actual moment, which I think some fans did.
Yeah, it's interesting that some of the fans, I guess, and by the way, I had not heard that they were more specific about what and who they were booing. But I will say booing in a stadium is kind of like a buckshot, right? It's not a sniper rifle. And so what the players that we claim to support and want to cheer on, what they hear running into the locker room is that we got booed. And if you watch all the player press conferences after that game, the first thing that they were asked, each of them, Cole Potts, Jacob Dobbs, George Pettaway, they were all asked about, how did you feel about the boos? And I none of them said, you know what? I just think that the fans were probably just upset with Chesney's clock management at the end. Right. So booing is a shotgun, is not a sniper rifle. So, and you know, as I think about I guess the relationship between players and fans now, this has always been one of my biggest concerns with NIL, because the way that I see it, there are a lot of people that are probably going into their pockets and their pocketbooks and their bank accounts with their hard-earned money and contributing to these collectives. And now when they're watching this performance on the field, they're like, yo, I paid for that. Right. Boo. I could have bought eggs and some bread and all these other things. Inflation's all high, and I'm giving money to the collective so that we can keep these players. And so I do think that is a nasty byproduct of NIL. I think fans are more personally invested in the performance of the players because they're giving their hard-earned money to these collectives. Had you considered that before, Bennett?
I have heard some fans say that. I think some fans also definitely sort of miscalculate like the payday for Ohio State's quarterback versus like what JMU's paying a player, right? So they're like, you know, these guys now are just making hundreds of thousands. It's like, well, I don't know if the guys you were booing on Saturday were making hundreds of thousands specifically.
Yeah, no. And, you know, it's funny. The NFL is the same way. Everybody assumes that if you're in the NFL, you're a millionaire. I mean, I think my rookie year, I made $225,000. My third year in the league, I think I made $350,000 in New York City, by the way. That's no money. You know, so anyway, I think we kind of have to put that in perspective. And sort of speaking of perspective, going back to what I said, you got to survive. We are 2-0. And so if you look across the college football landscape, there's a lot of teams that barely squeak by what you might consider lesser opponents. And the biggest example, I think, is, you know, you look at number 15, Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma beat a bad Houston team 16-12. A Houston team, by the way, that got boat raced by UNLV last week, right? Oklahoma was a 49-point favorite. That's number one. The next one, I would say Oregon, number 7, Oregon over Boise State. Oregon barely won 37-34. They were a 3-score favorite over Boise State. Now, I know Boise State's supposed to be one of the best teams in the G5, but Oregon was an 18.5-point favorite. What about Penn State? Number 8, Penn State, 34-27 over Bowling Green. Now, Bennett, I heard a lot of our fans say, oh, Gardner-Webb, I never even heard of them, right? How many of our fans have probably even heard of Bowling Green University? The same number of fans. And that Bowling Green team took Penn State to the fourth quarter, right? Penn State was down at halftime. Penn State was a 35.5-point favorite over Bowling Green. All right. Now, how about this? Georgia State squeaked by an FCS opponent, Chattanooga. 24-21. And I know you could say, you know, Georgia State's not great, but they also played an FCS opponent, and they had to score late in the fourth quarter to win that game. Those are the teams that actually won. They squeaked by. What about the teams that didn't win? What's the first one I'm going to talk about, Bennett? Tell me.
I feel like we're about to hit the Northern Illinois Notre Dame love.
I mean, come on. Notre Dame, number 5, Notre Dame loses to Northern Illinois. Now, Notre Dame was a 28.5-point favorite. And what do you think their fans felt like? And I don't know if anybody, I mean, I don't know that I heard any boos. Did you hear any boos in the stadium?
I think they were pretty locked in, if I'm not mistaken, from watching clips of that game. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody, I don't think anybody even booed. It was Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois. FCS St. Francis beat FBS Kent State 23-17. FCS Idaho beat FBS Wyoming 17-13. FCS Southern Utah beat FBS UTEP 27-24. And I got to shout out my guy, Delane Fitzgerald, who I played with. He was our fullback when I was with the Dukes at JMU, but got the big win over an FBS program. So as you can see, I know we weren't happy with the performance. I know we wanted them to come out with a clinic, but there are a lot of teams yesterday that barely squeaked by lesser opponents and some that didn't survive at all. Thoughts for you, though, Bennett, on the overall landscape of college football yesterday and the topsy-turviness that was, some of these David and Goliath opponents?
Crazy sport, and I think people forget, maybe some JMU fans, that like the way you play one week does not necessarily mean you're going to play the same way every week the rest of the season. And the thing that really stands out to me is how some of these Sunbelt teams with new coaches have fared. Troy looks bad.
Troy looks bad.
They look bad. Memphis kind of spanked them yesterday. They lost their first game to Nevada. You mentioned Georgia State's going through some struggles. South Alabama, I believe, is 0-2 as well. They have a new head coach in Major Applewhite. Being 2-0 with a new head coach, that much turnover, it's nothing to scoff at, even though the performance yesterday was not ideal.
Yeah, totally. And by the way, we again, I said earlier that we got to kind of survive those first 3 weeks. Lucky for us, our third week is a bye, and we get to get healthy and work out some wrinkles. And I said earlier about this whole sort of David and Goliath issue. I would tell you, Bennett, that it is easier to be David than it is to be Goliath. I actually thrive on the idea of being David, especially as a 5'6" running back kind of guy. Like, I love being David. I love being the overachiever. And when I tell you that a smaller school like a Gardner-Webb, they feed off the energy of our crowd. Yeah. They come into a place like Bridgeforth with 25, 26,000 screaming people when they averaged last year at their place 4,800 fans a game. Right? The stadium was half empty and they only had 4,800 people there. And then they come into Bridgeforth and we got fans and we got big time college atmosphere. They feed off of that. I know from personal experience, because when I was with the Dukes and we went to go play Virginia Tech in 1999, and we walked in the Lane Stadium. And by the way, we got good crowds at JMU when I was there. We had, pretty good attendance. But walking in the Lane Stadium and seeing what we all wanted to go to college and play for, which was big time college football, bro, we were hype. Like, we were fired up. And so the energy in that stadium fed us and gave us hope and optimism and electricity. So much so that on our very first drive, a guy who you got to meet 2 weeks ago, Curtis Keaton, breaks off like a 65, 70-yard run on like literally our first drive, gets it down inside the Virginia Tech 5-yard line. And you know what we're all looking around saying? Holy cow, we can beat these guys. We can do this. Now, unfortunately, the next play was an offside or illegal procedure. The next play was a hold. And so we went from inside their 5 to on the 25-yard line. We didn't score. We ended up losing the game 47-0. But the point of the story is we came out fired up. Yeah. The key in that is that Virginia Tech actually took the life out of us. And that is something that JMU did not do to Gardner-Webb. They did quite the opposite. They gave Gardner-Webb hope. And when a team like Gardner-Webb has hope, then they have a lot to play for, especially in the second half of a game.
Yeah.
Now, here's the other thing that I want to say about Gardner-Webb. I know that, you guys, a lot of JMU Nation says, I've never even heard of this team. I've never heard of this school. Gardner-Webb is not a slouch program.
No.
You just haven't heard of them. Now, I saw a lot of comparisons and I'm back on social media. I'm not a social media guy. I hate social media. I could say the sky is blue and there'd be 17 people that get in the comments and say horrible things about me because I said the sky was blue. But I got on social media, and as I'm reading some of these comments, they're like, oh, Indiana beat Western Illinois. Western Illinois, Indiana beats Western Illinois 77-3. So Coach Sig is there now, right? So JMU 2.0 beats Western Illinois. Western Illinois is one of the worst FCS programs on the planet. They finished dead last in their conference last year. They lost to a Division II school last season, and they're probably going to be even worse this year. So I take no pride in the fact that, Indiana beat a Western Illinois team 77-3. Gardner-Webb is not Western Illinois. So I want to remind you that people around the country also said they had never heard of JMU. When we went down and beat Southern Methodist, SMU, a couple of years ago with Vad Lee, and there were people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that said, who is this JMU team? I never heard of them, and we just lost a game to them. So let me tell you about Gardner-Webb. Bennett, have you done any research on Gardner-Webb's program and their history?
I have the last few years. I was a big Trey Lamb guy.
Exactly. So Trey Lamb, great coach. They have a really good coach now, I think, too. I mean, that guy schemed up a really good game plan against us. Obviously saw some things on film against UNC Charlotte that they thought they could expose. But let me tell you about Gardner-Webb. So for our fans in JMU Nation who want to boo our players and make it seem like we barely squeaked by, which we did, this lesser FCS program. Last year, this same team played App State. They played them tight, right? App State had a league. Actually, Gardner-Webb was leading this game going into the third quarter against App State, the same App State team that beat us. Now, App State got 2 late touchdowns in the fourth quarter to seal it, but that game was tight and in doubt, just like this JMU game this year. Again, the same App State team that beat us. In 2022, Liberty beat them 21-20. FBS Liberty, who won, I think, the Conference USA that year, barely squeaked by this Gardner-Webb team 21-20. In 2022, Coastal Carolina was trailing them late in the fourth quarter and needed some fourth quarter heroics and a touchdown late to win 31-27. And by the way, this is the same Coastal Carolina team that played for the Sun Belt Championship, with an asterisk, of course, because we couldn't play in that game. But an FCS program took the Sun Belt Conference runner-up late into the fourth quarter and only lost by 4 points. And lastly, just to give you even more icing on the cake, to let you know that Gardner-Webb is no slouch of a program. They are not Western Illinois. In 2021, Georgia Southern barely beat them 25-20. And Georgia Southern had a pretty solid team. So again, I want people to recognize that just because they are an FCS program, they took their 65 or whatever scholarships and brought them against our 83 scholarships, and they said, let's play ball. And that's what they did.
They were also highly aggressive on fourth down, right? They came to win the game. I think they were 4 of 6 on fourth down. Like, they weren't pulling out leaving anything in their bag. They were trying to bring everything they could. So I was impressed with them, even if JMU maybe didn't play its best game. I thought Gardner-Webb showed up really trying to get the upset.
Well, I was going to say that, like, when you are David and not Goliath, then, you are a team, you are very dangerous because you have nothing to lose. Gardner-Webb got a check to come play JMU. I don't know what that check was, but it's just like Northern Illinois got $1.4 million to go in and play Notre Dame. And then they beat them. So that was the bonus. But really, they just fixed a lot of their budget issues at Northern Illinois by collecting a check from Notre Dame for $1.4 million. Gardner-Webb got a check. And the reality is, when you're David going into that situation, we're going to leave with that check whether we win or lose. So we have nothing to lose. So literally everywhere on that field for them was 4 down territory.
Yep.
That made them very dangerous. I got frustrated because I was like, yo, you should punt. This is not college football 25 on PlayStation. Like, punt the ball. It was very frustrating. All right.
Yeah, they were not about the punting.
They were not about punting. I really wanted some work on our punt return unit. But let's talk about it. I mean, obviously, some of the concerns that, people had are valid. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm being unfair, that I'm coming down too hard on some of those, the people booing. I do, again, believe that was a minority. of people in the stands that were booing. They were a vocal minority. I'm so glad I didn't get a chance to stay for the game because that probably would not have ended well for me. My wife may have had to send bail money if I had been sitting next to someone booing. But some of those concerns are absolutely valid, especially on offense, where we got off to another slow start where it really looked like we had no rhythm. We also had no identity. And lastly, it just felt like we just had no cohesiveness either in the run and or pass game. So what were some of your bigger takeaways from that first half of play on the offense?
Yeah, I had a chance to rewatch some of the game. It wasn't quite as bad as I thought, sort of similar to Charlotte from watching it during the
Not
moment.
you, the pessimist. Okay, let's go.
But there were a few plays like where the play was schemed open, maybe Barnett missed a throw, or there was one missed block. And when Chesney was saying that post-game, he was like, we're a block away. I was like, oh, rolling my eyes. And then I watched it back. I was like, they're kind of like a block away on some of these plays. So he does know what he's talking about, shockingly. The head coach of the team was aware of how his guys were playing. But it wasn't quite that bad. I think what was frustrating is that they were still sort of missing some of these plays that felt like they had them schemed up. They're ready to go against a team that, we mentioned it, right? They've got some good program tradition, but they're obviously not North Carolina. So I think that's maybe where the fear is for some fans, especially, is, hey, I was so gearing up for this North Carolina game. Like, we're going to pull this upset. And then it sort of changes their expectations. So it was a little bit frustrating, but I do think the second half, they did find a better rhythm, which impressed me a little bit.
Yeah, the slow start concerns me, though,
Yes.
because the challenge is, you just mentioned, and obviously we're going to get into the North Carolina a little bit more next week, but
Yeah.
I think the challenge for going into North Carolina is that if we have that kind of slow start, we could be in a situation like App State found themselves in against Clemson this past week, where they look up and it's like 32-0, and we're still in the first half.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. The challenge I see from my perspective is that there really is no offensive identity. Like, at least last year, I kind of knew who Cignetti was trying to be, both on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. And right now, I still have no idea what we are trying to be. Like, what are we aspiring to on offense and even defense at times? Kind of a weird thing for me, even on defense, is that, we're used to not seeing teams run for 4 and 5 yards a carry.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 yards here and there, usually no gain. And now it's like their running backs at an FCS offensive line, they're opening up holes and running for 4 or 5 yards. And that is weird for me to see. So I think the identity part, if you had to guess, though, what would you say? Because I think the first half was more about offense than defense. What would you say the offensive identity aspiration is from your perspective right now?
That's a great question. I think ideally they would love to be, the way they've sort of built the roster, like a power running team, because you've got Barnett, who can run the ball really well. Io Adei, who got banged up in this game, hasn't totally shown what he can do, but had a great career at North Texas. George Pettaway is really flashing, the North Carolina transfer. So I feel like that would sort of be their ideal, is they can run it and then open up play action a little bit. But it seems like they haven't quite been able to do that. And then it sort of looks a little disjointed when they get in 3rd and long. And then obviously you're not going to run the ball much on 3rd and long. So it gets a little clunky, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, you mentioned George Pettaway. It's interesting. While I was in the Berg this weekend, I tried to go to the JMU bookstore. Can't get into the parking lot. I don't know how you shop there because you can't drive a car into that parking lot. So I went to University Outpost. George Pettaway has a whole, I would say, a merchandise shrine of NIL gear, like jerseys. They actually say Pettaway on the back. He's got a whole table devoted just to him. And while I'm in there, I'm like, yo, this dude is good. But I mean, a whole merchandise shrine. And as I'm watching that game, dude, I saw Shady McCoy.
Yeah.
Like he is maybe the most explosive player to put on a JMU football uniform that I've seen.
Ooh.
In ages. Like, this dude is fast. He's quick. He has amazing vision, and he is explosive. He's just a football player, and he can play in the backfield and catch passes and return kicks and do everything. So really, really excited about what he brings. The other person that I was really, really excited about was Tyler Purdy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that the guy runs downhill. As a running back, one of the things that I always look at from another running back is when they get tackled, do they fall forward or do they fall backwards? Right. And for Tyler Purdy, a lot of times when he got tackled, he was still falling forward for 2 or 3 more yards. And that is just a function of just shoulder lean, right? Like he gets low and he has very good shoulder lean forward. Yeah. And so when he gets tackled, he's going to fall for an extra yard. It's interesting to me that I feel like my observation from the last 2 weeks, when times get tough, I feel like Chesney goes to some of those guys that he trusts, that he knows are going to perform, the guys that he's had a history with at Holy Cross. And I was actually surprised to see Tyler Purdy in the game in some of those critical situations. Of course, not knowing at the time that Ayo Adeyi was actually hurt.
Right.
But Purdy gave us a spark. So what did you think about his performance?
I was sort of feeling the same way when he came in. I was like, oh, this is like this game is close. I very much trust this guy at running back kind of move. And it made sense. He's done a really good job his whole career. He's never had that many carries, but he's always been really productive. And he had 10 carries for 58 yards and was just really solid. He had the lone touchdown for the Dukes. He did kind of exactly what they asked him to do. And like you were saying, every time he got the ball, it seemed like a positive gain.
Always. He's got really good vision. And, you know, it's I don't want to say this because he's not slow, but he's also not super quick. And when you are in a sort of a slow developing, you know, zone read sort of offense, being a little slower with the ball actually helps you because you don't overly anticipate, you know, the openings that are happening in front of you. You're a little more patient and you can see things developing maybe on the backside. So if you watch him run the ball, the fact that he was a little slower in the backfield, I think benefited and actually attributed to his ability to find some seams. Because he found some holes where I thought maybe there was going to be a TFL. Speaking of TFLs, I think Gardner-Webb had 6 TFLs in this game. I think they also had 3 sacks.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about AB3 for a second. What were your overall observations of AB3 coming into his second week as the starter? Obviously not the start that he wanted, but what were your observations of his play?
Thought he did some nice stuff. The first throw, obviously, maybe some jitters there where he airmailed Yamir Knight, what I felt like 10 yards over his head. But after that, I think he settled in nicely, did a decent job. I kind of felt like the receivers didn't help him out a lot. Yeah. He had a couple throws there that I felt like could have been caught that weren't, which could have gone for big gains or first downs. I thought he did okay. I thought he didn't carry the offense necessarily, but I feel like the receivers could have done a little bit more. I also would have loved to see him maybe in the second half more involved with design runs, because that was something against Charlotte where when he got the ball into space, his legs are a weapon.
Yeah. I felt the exact same way. I mean, you know, we didn't talk about this, obviously, right? I mean, I know we had a group chat going during the game, and we did, our own version of booing because we were acknowledging how frustrated we were with the performance in the first half. But I will say that for me, I think AB3 played well. I think he was adequate. If you look at it, he completed over 60% of his passes. He made some really big throws when we really needed them. He made some pro style throws to the sideline, to the boundary a couple of times that, you know, again, a lot of college players, a lot of college quarterbacks struggle to make those throws, especially in those situations. So I was overall pleased with his performance. The thing that I guess surprised me is that I did not see us take any shots downfield.
That was surprising also.
That was interesting. So to your earlier point, we had, you know, number one, we did not have those designed AB3 runs, and we also appeared not to take any planned shots downfield. Now, I guess I'm going to chalk that up to a function of maybe we didn't want to open up the playbook too much, expecting to kind of steamroll this lesser FCS program. I'm not going to say that that was the case because I have no evidence to that point, but it just seemed like we kind of kept the playbook sort of close to the vest, maybe looking ahead to North Carolina a little bit. What did you think about that?
That's going to be an interesting one. And Chesney made a comment post game where he was talking about, like, I'll have to go back on film and see if there were like guys open downfield that we just didn't pull the trigger on, which I'm interested to see if he elaborates on that later in the week, because that was against Charlotte. That was what was working so well. Dollison down the field, Cam Ross down the field. They were creating these huge explosive plays. You think in a close game against Gardner-Webb, maybe you try that once or twice, because I don't think you feel like you probably have a huge edge with Cam Ross or Omarion Dollison one-on-one against a Gardner-Webb defensive back. So to not take those shots was a bit surprising considering Barnett's deep ball accuracy. And you talked about the identity. That almost seemed like maybe what they were going to have it be, right? Going through last week was like Barnett stretching the field. So to not see that was a little bit surprising in the first half, especially.
Yeah, I thought the identity was going to be explosive plays on offense. Like explosive big plays. Let's dink and dunk you, and then we're going to hit you with the explosion, and you're not going to see it coming. In fairness, they put that on film last week.
Yeah.
And so Gardner-Webb coming into this game, I think Jacob Dobbs alluded to this in his post-game presser. He said that, Gardner-Webb did some things on defense that they practiced, but they did not necessarily expect to see the entire game. And some of those things may have confused AB3 a little bit, especially in the secondary, and may have also attributed to the fact that we didn't take any shots downfield. I do, obviously, again, I hate social media. Of course, the calls for the quarterback change are out there. And, I just look at, AB3's performance. The guy had no turnovers. I think it was a pretty accurate performance. Again, I'm not saying that Dylan Morris is not a capable quarterback. He's a great young man. He probably would be a really good quarterback for the Dukes, but I've seen exactly one practice. It was the spring game. These coaches have evaluated both of their quarterbacks, and they've made the decision. And so, again, it's like I said in episode 1, controversies are for fans. They're not about the team or the coaching staff. And so hopefully, we can sort of put some of that to rest in the coming weeks. You know what, Bennett, I want to get your take on this. I did not love the decision to kick the field goal in the first quarter. I didn't love that. It's a 47-yarder. I think we needed like 2 yards or so to
get first
down there. And I said this on, last week as we were talking about Charlotte, because I hated the decision not to take the points in the first half in Charlotte. But, we're at the mullet. I said if we were at the mullet, you go for it there and keep the drive going. So what did you think about that decision to kick that field goal? Obviously, it turned out poorly because we missed it wide right. But what did you think about the decision?
I was surprised because I thought for sure they were going to go for it based off of last week. And then Chesney's explanation post-game had me maybe even a little more confused, where he was saying there was really they weren't even thinking about going for it. They were playing the wind. So I guess at the end of the first quarter, with time winding down, they were seeing if they could get an offsides for an easy first down. And if that didn't happen, they were going to kick because the field was going to flip and they would have the wind at their back. But like no way a place kicker doesn't seem like he needs a lot of wind the way he's booming those through the upright. So I was a little surprised that they were leaning field goal there. And again, you talk about that identity. I kind of thought like the explosive plays, really aggressive on 4th and short in opposing territory. I thought those were going to be the identity a little bit. And I'm curious because you've obviously played on a bunch of teams that are setting up an identity. Is that something that's discussed a lot, like in practices or in meeting rooms, establishing an identity? And if you're a player, can you sort of feel if your offense doesn't have one?
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of a media thing. I think that's something for us. I think that's something for fans. I do think that there is a mindset that players and teams want to create. And to your point, I really thought that one of the things that this team was sort of trending to was, hey, we're going to be aggressive. And we're at home right now, and we need 2 yards. Let's be aggressive and go get 2 yards. I can't see bringing my kicker out on the field to kick a 47-yarder, and I know he's got the leg for it, but go get the 2 yards in that situation. If it was a 35-yarder, maybe you take the points. I'm okay with that. But a 47-yarder for a college kicker,
Yeah.
kind of a big deal. I'd say go for it and let's get the first down. I thought the defense played well though. And obviously, if you look at it, this team this defensive unit has only given up 1 touchdown in 2 weeks. So they've given up 2 field goals, they gave up 2 field goals in this past game. So I'm okay with that. And by the way, that Sadie kid is a good running back.
Yeah,
I think he was a starting running back at Temple.
Yep.
And so I did think the defense played well. Although, as I'm looking at the game on both sides of the ball, it does not look like we are dominating the line of scrimmage. That has been a concern. Now, last year, of course, under Sig, the offensive line didn't appear to dominate the line of scrimmage. As Jack Fitzpatrick, the EPA king, will tell you, every time we handed the ball off, we took points off the scoreboard. This year, it seems like we're getting a little more push on the offensive line side of the ball. But on defense, it looks like we're losing on the defensive line of scrimmage. Was that your observation, Bennett Conlin?
Yeah, so I was looking at this because I was trying to figure out why the offense. So the offensive possessions in the second half, it was touchdown, field goal, and then they successfully burned out the clock to win the game.
Right.
4 good drives. So I was like, wait, why did they only have 4 second half drives? And then I was looking at it. Gardner-Webb had almost a 6-minute drive, third quarter, middle of the third, that ended late in the third. They had an 8-minute and 42-second drive in the fourth quarter. Gardner-Webb basically had 1 drive that was the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And that's something that was really surprising. I think there's only 1, or there were 3 and outs, but Gardner-Webb had as many drives of 5+ minutes. That's not something that was happening last year because of the line of scrimmage, right? Where they were getting so many tackles for loss, so many sacks that they were creating these 3rd and longs and then getting teams off the field immediately. I went back. I think JMU had 7 3 and outs forced against Bucknell last year. So they were forcing all these 3 and outs. Not as many this year. They're kind of doing the bend but don't break, and they're not breaking at all. But I was surprised to see Gardner-Webb have so many sustained drives.
Yeah, which I think is why it's so much more important for us when we get the ball on offense. We got to go down and score. We got to get points. Because to your point, I mean, Gardner-Webb held the ball a lot. Their coaching staff schemed up a fantastic game plan for JMU, and it did not look like we reciprocated, because maybe we just didn't want to put too much on film, which I totally understand. I said last week that Gardner-Webb should not have a punch that can knock us out. So we should not be afraid of anything that they can do, but we still got to put together a game plan, and Gardner-Webb executed their game plan, I think, to perfection. Obviously Coach Chesney said all week that this was Gardner-Webb Super Bowl, but this is our, he tried to hype our players up and say it was also our Super Bowl. Obviously, I don't think our players felt the same way, because there were even some of the players in the post-game presser that questioned the effort.
Yeah.
And so, did we even take them serious? And so, again, I'm glad that we survived and that we're 2-0 at this point.
Did you ever have any of those games in college where you're playing a team that you kind of feel like you're going to beat, and maybe some of the guys get a little bit lackluster in their prep or their game effort?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's human nature. Obviously we all watch film, we look at records, and there are games that you go into that you're like, this should be a cakewalk. And then you get into the game and it's close in the fourth quarter and you're like, oh snap, what have we gotten ourselves into?
Yeah.
I think the other challenge for these younger players is that you're coming off the win at Charlotte, which kind of looked like a blowout, even though if you were there, it wasn't a blowout.
Right.
But you won 30-7. Everybody's patting you on the back, telling you how great you are. You also get to come home. And so for some of these players, first time playing in Bridgeforth Stadium, a lot of these players first time having major contributions on the team, the game preparation this week for a home game is a lot different than maybe what they were anticipating. And so all the hoopla and the pomp and circumstance going into the game, in the first home game of the season, they got to find tickets for their family members and all these distractions. I saw it all in the first half. And those were some of the challenges that I remember facing as a player. It's just like there's so much going on that I'm not even thinking about the game, especially when we're playing the FCS team, Gardner-Webb.
Yeah.
So I do want to say, like, I guess as we think about the defense, one more thing that I guess I would like to talk about. Jacob Dobbs, absolute monster.
Yeah.
10 solo tackles, I think, in the game. Jacob Thomas, right, with the INT. Who got the other interception?
The other one was Chauncey Logan. He made a really nice play near the ground on one.
What a play.
Yeah.
I mean, that was probably I just, I can't believe he caught it, because when they reviewed that, I thought they were going to reverse it.
Right.
But he made such a great play on the ball. He competed, he fought for the ball. And that goes back to, I think, the point that I wanted to make about the second half. If you look at how the offense came out in the second half, they had a sense of urgency.
Yes.
I mean, they drove the ball right down the field with a sense of urgency. And so I just need this team to come out in the first half of the game with that same sense of urgency. But my point is, Chauncey Logan on that play, he looked like a guy that said, you know what? These guys are booing us in our home stadium. Watch this. I'm going to go out and make a play. So I was so proud of that young man for that play specifically.
I've been really impressed with the defense's ability to not get kind of bogged down by what the offense is doing. At least for me personally, I feel like that'd be really easy to be like, man, like, why are these guys not scoring? But they seem like they're just consistently making plays, like even if the offense struggles.
Yeah, I think the defense, I mean, again, it's that whole bend, don't break mentality, which I am not a fan of. Like, I would rather you just break the other team.
Right.
But there's a lot of, I think, bend, don't break. And I think that both of these units are going to get much better as the season goes on. And so as we think about sort of the keys to the off week, obviously we're going to talk a lot about UNC in the coming week. But as I think about the keys to sort of this bye week, the first thing is I want to see these guys get healthy. You're never as healthy as you are before the season starts, but this is an awesome opportunity for us to get some guys who, are maybe a little banged up, a little nicked up, like Ayo Adeyi, right? Like Taji Hudson, who was dressed out for the game, but did not actually, I don't think he made an appearance.
I don't think so.
I think it's a great opportunity to get those people healthy and get them in the game ready for North Carolina. I think it's also a great sort of week for them all to sort of reflect on, what they just went through. I think it was a wake-up call. I think it was, Coach Chesney said it in the postgame. He said, you can either learn lessons from a win or you can learn lessons from a loss. You much rather learn lessons in victory. And so I think that this Gardner-Webb game was absolutely a wake-up call for the Dukes, and hopefully it forces them to do an identity check. Let's find that identity. And then the last thing, I guess, is, obviously one time, if it happens once, it's chance. If it happens twice, it's coincidence. But the third time is a trend. And so as we kind of go into the off week, I want to make sure that whatever's happening in that locker room where the team is not coming out in that first half ready to perform, especially on offense, hopefully they get that piece sorted out. So Bennett, I guess for you, are there any other thoughts or takeaways for you as we go into this bye week?
Yeah, I'm interested for your perspective on this too. They keep rotating guys like in excessive amount, and they're talking a little bit about like, hey, they're fresher in the fourth quarter, and I kind of get that. I'm particularly confused on some of the offensive line rotations where you'll see a lot of different switching and things. I was always of the belief that like the chemistry there and the cohesion of the specific five was really valuable. So I was surprised in the first half where it's been kind of clunky that they haven't been like, I love these 11. Let's go with these 11 for as long as we can. What are your thoughts on maybe sticking with at least a combination on the O-line a little bit longer to see if that can lead to some chemistry?
Yeah, so it's interesting you brought that up. That was also in my notes for tonight's show. I think on offense, you're right. I mean, that consistency and cohesion makes a lot of sense. On defense, you do need fresh bodies.
Yeah.
And there isn't sort of that same sort of teamwork, working together as a well-oiled machine sort of thing. But there's also a flow and a rhythm to a game. And when you have to sit out a series, sit out one or two series, irrespective of whether or not you're tired, it's hard to find a rhythm in the game. It's hard to, and you know, especially for offensive line, like if you get rotated out, you know, at some point you sort of get used to what that defensive lineman, what their best move is. And when you're in and out, it really makes it hard for you to get a read on, all right, I'm back in the game. And what is this person's move? If I'm on defense and that offensive lineman, I got this move that I want to try out on him on the next series, but I'm on the bench, so I can't try it. And so there is a rhythm to the game that I do believe that a lot of the excessive swapping in and out, while I like it in theory, I don't know that it is exactly beneficial for this for either unit. I will say, Bennett, my guess, and I do not know this to be true, but my guess is that they're still auditioning players. I honestly think that they are still looking at this as, hey, let's evaluate the talent that we have. We believe that we can get by Charlotte with some lackluster performance. We believe that we can get through Gardner-Webb with maybe, you know, still doing a talent evaluation. But in this bye week, we're going to pick our best 22 players on both sides of the ball, and we're going to go play Chapel Hill. What do you think about that?
I kind of feel that way too. That was sort of in the back of my mind that, hey, like the rotations might be at least a lot less frequent after the bye week, which will be interesting because they've gotten some experience now. They got some guys, some reps. And I think if they can get Tyshawn Wyatt back at left tackle for that North Carolina game and add him to whatever the rotation is, that would be valuable too, because he's a beast, played a lot of games and certainly played a lot of FBS games over the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the overall key, man, we just got to find a way to get the ball into the hands of our playmakers. I was so glad that George Pettaway got so many touches. Dollison didn't really get the ball. And I think he got targeted once in that game. All he does is catch touchdowns. I mean, he caught three passes in his JMU career, and 2 of them were touchdowns. We got to find a way. Hopefully AO gets healthy and we can get him the ball. Yamir Knight lost a tooth in that game, I think. And so came back into the game late, but we got to find a way to get him the ball. So just really want to see our playmakers get their hands on the ball. All right, Bennett, you know what time it is. It is time for What You Talking About, Willis.
What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about, Willis?
All right, so this week's What You Talking About, Willis comes from, I hate to do this because it's one of my favorite writers over at NBC Sports. Nicole Auerbach says in her weekly column where she talks about major takeaways from college football. Well, this week, she said that a major byproduct of the G5 being included in the college football playoff is that the season matters more for G5 teams this year. She said, and I quote, "We are seeing it in effort, motivation, and even results so far." Of course, she cited Boise State, their close loss to Oregon, and Northern Illinois' win over Notre Dame as proof that this season matters more to G5 teams. And Nicole, I love you. I love your takeaways. I read them every single week. But what you talking about, Willis? I mean, these are proud programs that are going to go out and play these games as hard as they possibly can, and they are not thinking about any sort of CFP playoff appearance. If you think about Notre Dame, by the way, they lost to Marshall last year. Marshall had absolutely, I'm going to say, zero chance of making the college football playoff last year, but they still went out and gave all their heart, effort, and determination into beating the Fighting Irish. Northern Illinois, if you want to see how much that game meant to them, look at their coach after the game in the press conference. I mean, the dude was crying real tears, and that was not about him saying, oh my God, we're now going to have an opportunity, I think, if we run the table to play in the college football playoff. It was him saying, we just walked into, the most storied college football program in history and won a game. And, oh, by the way, they're ranked number 5 in the country at the time, and we just collected a check for $1.4 million. So, Bennett, what do you think about Nicole's take, I guess, on the G5 playing harder this year because they're eligible for the playoff?
I thought that take might sort of find itself get thrown out there in like late November when you're talking about like some of these rivalry games or something of maybe like a 6-5 team trying to spoil their conference rival season or something. But yeah, I don't think Northern Illinois was thinking about college football playoff in that game. And you can't be because they've still got, 90% of their season left.
Yeah. And it's such I agree with you. I think if she had that take later, I think that you would see a lot of these teams who are, sort of in the echelon of teams that will get an opportunity to win that automatic bid from the G5. I think you would see, but I think it would be the opposite. I think these teams are going to be tight. I think there's going to be some teams that get upset late in the season because they have that opportunity to get there. Not the opposite, especially not this early in the season. Love you, Nicole, but what you talking about, Willis? All right, Bennett, you know what time it is. It's time for us to take it to the house. Of course, this is my closing commentary. And, I have to think about this old saying that a lot of people have, because some people say that nice guys finish last. Some of those same people also say that players' coaches also finish last. There's long since been this perception in sports that the most successful coaches are jerks. The Belichicks, the Sabans, the Signettis. Now, I've personally had the opportunity to play with a lot of coaches with a lot of different personalities over the years. I've played for some winning coaches and some losing coaches. But the coaches who have had the biggest impact on me as a person have undoubtedly been the coaches that many would identify as players' coaches. There was my high school basketball coach, Ben Gravely, who after every practice posted a thought of the day on the wall because he wanted to teach us about more than basketball. Many of those thoughts have guided me through my adult life. Many I have shared with my children. I'll probably share, Bennett, on some of those thoughts on this podcast. But he was a player's coach. There was also Alex Wood, the head coach at JMU when I arrived on campus as an uninvited, unrecruited walk-on in 1996. And while he didn't have the greatest JMU coaching career, he personally changed the trajectory of my football career when my dad practically begged him to give me a scholarship since we couldn't really afford to pay tuition for one more semester. It was his belief in me as a player and as a person that kept me in the Berg and ultimately led to a Hall of Fame JMU career and 3 seasons in the NFL. By the time I got to the NFL, by the way, he was the quarterbacks coach for the Vikings. And when we played them in Minnesota my rookie year, he and I met up at midfield before the game, exchanged a dap and a hug. And the first thing he asked me was, "How's your dad?" He was a player's coach. There was also Jim Fossil with the Giants, who many accused of being too much of a player's coach when he was fired after the 2003 season, even though he had led the Giants to a Super Bowl appearance 4 years prior. Of course, his successor, Tom Conlin, came in to lay down the hammer and bring back, quote unquote, discipline to the franchise. I was there when he famously fined Michael Strahan for being on time for a meeting. Needless to say, it wasn't until Conlin softened his tone and became more of a player's coach did he actually lead the Giants to a Super Bowl victory in 2008. Perhaps the only criticism I've heard so far about Chesney is that he's too positive. Imagine that. He's too positive. But everywhere he's been, his players rave about him and what he's meant to them as a coach. Bob Chesney just might be a player's coach. Which brings me to Coach Mickey Matthews. I was in the audience at his Hall of Fame induction this past Friday and listening to him deliver a quintessential Mickey speech from the podium. But there was a phrase that he repeated over and over that stood out to me. He said, "I loved the kids." He said it several times. I loved the kids. He said God wanted him to be a college football coach. And then he got choked up, albeit briefly. I don't even know if most people even noticed that he got choked up while telling a story about one of the players that he coached at JMU. He indeed loved his players. In fact, he tells me he loves me every single time I see him. Every single time we talk on the phone, he tells me he loves me. or when he accidentally FaceTimes me and then I end up, looking at his ceiling fan while he tells me some story about college football. And after 15 seasons at JMU, 3 conference championships, the first national championship in program history, winning the Eddie Robinson Award as the best FCS coach in the country twice, and setting the program up for its astronomical success that we've all witnessed since he was unceremoniously fired, he was finally inducted into the JMU Sports Hall of Fame, proving that nice guys and players coaches can finish first. All right, JMU Nation, we are to the house. Thank you for joining us for episode 3. Bennett, how'd you like that wrap up? Are you good?
Incredible.
All right. So I want you to follow us on Twitter at JMU to the house. Also follow us on Instagram at JMU to the house. I'm so excited, by the way, that, over the last 2 weeks being around JMU Nation, I've had so many people come up to me and say they really enjoy the podcast. I think I'm being more known now as the host of To the House than as a JMU football player, which means we're doing a pretty good job. So follow, subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends. Thank you, JMU Nation. Let's go Dukes.
To the House is part of the JMU Sports News Network. New episodes of To the House with JMU Hall of Famer Delvin Joyce drop every Monday, and episodes of the JMU Sports News Podcast drop in the middle of every week. Subscribe to the JMU Sports News Network wherever you find your podcast and never miss an episode. You can watch every episode of To the House on the JMU Sports News YouTube. Stay updated on social at JMU Sports News and at JMU To the House, and at our website, jmusportsnews.com.